Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Olivia and I make content about veganism and animal rights activism. Today's video is going to be all about the terms halal and kosher. What do these terms actually mean and what do they mean for the animals who are involved? Before going vegan, I didn't really have a clue as to what these terms meant. I mean, I knew that they were religious, I knew that they had something to do with the slaughter of animals, but really that was the extent of my knowledge. If you haven't been exposed to Judaism or Islam, you might have maybe seen the terms halal and kosher written on food packets or even in the windows of restaurants, but never really needed to understand what these terms actually mean. But also from doing some reading online, I've realised that there's quite a few misconceptions and claims about halal and kosher slaughter. There's definitely this idea that it's some sort of instantaneous death and that it's a humane and pain-free method. But really, how much of this is true? Just a little disclaimer before we start. Obviously, this is a religious topic, so it's going to be sensitive for certain people. But I want to make it clear from the start that my goal with this video isn't actually about sort of the religious side of halal and kosher. I'm more concerned with what actually happens to the animals. And also, just sort of to put it out there, I believe that when we're dealing with social justice issues, whether it's to do with veganism or not, we should always try and look at things objectively and try and part from religion and culture and tradition wherever possible. So firstly, what is halal and what does this word actually mean? So halal is an Arabic word which translates to permissible. We often hear this word in reference to food, but it can just mean any lawful act under Islamic law. It is not halal, for example, to consume pork or drink alcohol. Halal also refers to the slaughter of animals using a prescribed method under Islamic law called zabiha. If an animal has been slaughtered according to zabiha, then it's considered permissible for Muslims to eat. If not, then it's considered haram and it's forbidden. So what does zabiha slaughtering actually entail? Animals are slaughtered with a sharp knife that severs both jugular veins and carotid arteries. The animal's throat must be cut by rapid, uninterrupted movements of a handheld knife. And whilst the animal is being slaughtered, a prayer has to be said mentioning Allah. And as well as that, the animals cannot actually see each other as they're being slaughtered. In British law, it's required that all animals who are going to be slaughtered have to be stunned beforehand. However, this doesn't apply to the Jewish and Muslim communities, meaning that animals don't have to be rendered unconscious before they have their throats slit. According to the RSPCA, 95% of animals slaughtered for halal in the UK are stunned first. There's much debate in the Muslim communities about whether stunning an animal before its death transgresses the laws written down in the Quran, but regardless, the vast number of animals slaughtered for halal meat in the UK do end up being stunned first. So their slaughter doesn't end up being much different from non-religious conventional slaughter in the UK. During halal slaughter, a prayer is said whilst the animal is being killed. Now, I fail to see how this prayer actually translates into anything for the animal, because at the end of the day, their throats are still being slit, whether somebody's saying a prayer or not. I'm more convinced that this prayer is used to ease the conscience of the person who's slitting the animal's throat, rather than anything to do with the animal's interests. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about kosher. Kosher is a Hebrew word which means fit or proper, and similar to halal, kosher foods are the only foods which are permitted to be eaten in Judaism. Kosher foods include ruminant animals with cloven hooves, such as cows and sheep, whereas non-kosher foods would be, for example, pigs, shellfish, and rabbits. Like zabiha in Islam, in Judaism, animals have to be killed in a prescribed manner known as sheshita. During the slaughter, the trachea and esophagus of an animal are severed with a sharp blade. At the moment, halal and kosher slaughter seem to be pretty similar, but there's one really big difference, and this is that for sheshita, so in Judaism, animals have to be completely conscious as they're being killed. In other words, they can't be stunned beforehand. The Jewish community claims that animals who are slaughtered according to sheshita only suffer the unavoidable pain, and this method causes instantaneous death. Thankfully, there has been quite a lot of research into slaughtering animals without pre-stunning them beforehand and the pain that they experience. According to the Farm Animal Welfare Committee, when a large transverse incision is made across the neck, a number of vital tissues are transected, including skin, muscle, the trachea, the esophagus, carotid arteries, jugular veins, major nerve trunks, plus numerous minor nerves. Such a drastic cut would inevitably trigger a barrage of sensory information to the brain in a conscious animal. We are persuaded that such a massive injury would result in very significant pain and distress in the period before insensibility supervenes. According to the FAWC, adult cattle can take between 22 and 40 seconds to become unconscious after neck cutting. So the reality is that slaughtering without prior stunning is an even crueler form of animal abuse. And for people to claim that it's without unavoidable pain is just false, because all this pain could have potentially been avoided had the animal been stunned beforehand. It is also certainly not an instantaneous death. Anyone claiming this is just barefaced lying. Death can take up to 2 minutes depending on the species, until the animal has lost enough blood to finally become unconscious. Jewish law requires that animals be treated with consideration, kindness, and respect. But how is this an act of respect? Respect has to be mutual. For me to respect you, I have to take into account your wishes, your needs, and vice versa. When we breed an animal into existence with the sole purpose of eventually slitting that animal's throat without their consent whilst the animal is still conscious, that is a complete lack of respect. But we also have to think about the alternative. Is stunning an animal prior to slitting their throat a much better option? And is it really painless for the animal? Firstly, what is the process of stunning and how are animals actually stunned in the UK? Stunning is either carried out by passing an electric current through an animal's brain or through a device called a captive bolt gun. However, in the UK, pigs and chickens are often stunned and eventually killed using gas killing. With pigs, this takes the form of a carbon dioxide chamber. The pig is confined into a metal cage and gradually lowered into a chamber with toxic levels of carbon dioxide. The gas acidifies the moisture around the pig's eyes, nose, and throat, and it's been compared to the feeling of burning from the inside out. And for context, 86% of British pigs are killed in this way. However, what is most sickening here is that pigs are known to thrash and suffer for up to 60 seconds before they finally lose consciousness. But this is almost exactly the same as what happens to the animals killed without prior stunning for halal and kosher meat. There is a period of intense suffering before the animal finally loses consciousness and then dies. So in reality, for the 86% of pigs and 70% of chickens who are gassed to death in the UK, their suffering is not that different to that endured by all of the kosher and the non-stun halal animals. After stunning, the animal is shackled by a hind leg, hoisted upwards, and then a slaughterhouse worker will stick the animal. Sticking is an industry term for cutting their throat. The Humane Slaughter Association, don't worry, I will comment on the name in a minute, as well as the RSPCA, like to present stunning animals as a humane measure, but in reality, stunning isn't always carried out successfully. I really struggled to find any studies looking at the effectiveness of stunning animals in the UK. However, there was a Swedish study from 2013 that looked at 998 cows who were stunned over a 5-day period using the captive bolt gun method. They found that of these 998 cows, only 84.1% were adequately stunned. The remaining individuals were then subjected to either repetitive stunning with the captive bolt gun or had their necks cut whilst they were still semi-conscious. What this study unfortunately showed us is that stunning is by no means effective all of the time. But regardless of this, we would be absolutely delusional to think that this whole ordeal is anything other than a highly distressing event for these animals. It causes them severe physical and mental harm, regardless of whether or not they've been stunned. Stunning is used to make humans feel better. When we mask the pain response of an animal, it makes taking their life from them a much more easy and digestible thing to do, because we're effectively silencing their pain. Realistically, even the animals that do get stunned have been subject to cruelty from the moment that they're born up until that final moment that they arrive in the stun box. For example, there are numerous routine mutilations in the animal agriculture industries, often practiced on newborns. Castration, tail docking, disbudding, beak trimming, laparoscopic AI, just to name a few. The dairy industry is rife with animal abuse. Cows undergo artificial insemination, where their reproductive systems are manipulated. They carry their babies for 9 months, only to give birth and have their babies stolen from them within hours. A mother cow will be expected to go through this up to 4 times in her life, and when her milk production finally wanes off, shall be sent to the slaughterhouse. Another example are farrowing crates used in the pork industries. These are still used on up to 60% of British farms. And then there's the transport to the slaughterhouse, where animals are packed into transport vehicles, often without any food and water, only to be led onto a production line whilst watching other members of their species be murdered right in front of them. My point here is this: it's all well and good debating the pain the animals may or may not face about whether they're going to be stunned, but in reality, this is only the final ordeal of the animal's life. For their entire existence up until that point, they have been treated as objects. They've been fattened up, mutilated, forced their bodies to exhaustion, and have known little else other than pain and suffering. If you're someone who really cares about animal welfare, then forget the debate between a slightly more or slightly less painful experience at the slaughterhouse. It would make much more sense just to not purchase these products in the first place. And what about God? Where does God come into all of this? Now, I know I said I wasn't going to get so religious, but I really think we need to consider whether something like religion should dictate important social justice issues such as animal welfare and animal rights. Punishments such as amputating someone's hand are religious and have been written down in religious scriptures, but the mere fact that this is religious doesn't, of course, make it moral. Once again, religion should never be used to justify abusive practices. We also have to think about the time in which these religious scriptures were written. Back then, eating animals for most people was a necessity. People relied on it for their survival. But this isn't the world that we live in today, and what we need to consider now is what's beneficial for our society in 2023. Plus, if God was really benevolent and loving, surely he or she wouldn't want sentient beings to suffer when they don't need to and don't want to. If every time we eat, we can choose to either increase suffering or reduce suffering for another sentient being, surely God would want us to choose the action that most reduce that suffering. Let's also consider the effect of these industries on our environment. Animal agriculture contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity loss, species extinction, deforestation, any action that contributes to destroying this beautiful world that God has created would surely be an action that he or she wouldn't want us to choose. And then, of course, there are the effects of slaughtering 84 billion land animals and 1 to 2.8 trillion fish each year on our own health. Pandemic risk, antibiotic resistance, cancers, heart disease, all these things cause immense suffering to humans. Surely God wouldn't want us to support that. Often when discussing the topic of slaughter, the RSPCA, the HSA, as well as Halal and Kosher organisations like to always use this term, humane slaughter. This term, humane slaughter, is thrown around so much, but often I feel we don't actually stop to ask ourselves whether it actually exists. The word humane, by definition, means to have or to show compassion or benevolence. So then we have to ask ourselves, can it ever be a compassionate or benevolent act to take the life of an animal who doesn't want to die and doesn't have to die? Humane slaughter is an oxymoron. It doesn't actually exist, and it was created by these industries to make consumers feel better about the products that they're purchasing. So to conclude, the science is pretty clear. Animals that aren't stunned prior to slaughter will suffer more. They are still conscious as their throats are ruthlessly slit and they're left to bleed out and die. But then the converse of stunning animals before slaughter isn't really much better. These animals still suffer immense pain during their whole lives. They suffer during the transport to the slaughterhouse. And then, of course, there's the immense psychological and physiological harm of being forced into a stun box after just having watched other members of your species go before you, only to have a steel bolt driven through your brain. We often get tied up with saying things like more ethical, more humane, but we forget to ask ourselves whether this industry and these processes are objectively ethical. These animals don't want to die, they don't have to die, and they will fight for their lives if given the chance. Whether they're killed in ways which are halal, kosher, or non-religious are largely inconsequential. There is no right way to do the wrong thing.